I am your host, Kemi Amin, and this is Who Are You? A podcast on purpose. Join me for conversations with people near and far about how they are finding their way, with one simple yet complex question. Who are you?
Linda Yaven, Elle, and I'm a human.
Episode 6. For this conversation, I had the pleasure of speaking with my former professor, Linda Yaven, also known as Elle. Elle is a thought leader on communication and creative agency. Elle has worked with clients at IDEO, Stanford University, Apple, Pixar, Google, World Bank, the Young Museum, Strong Brew, Gensler, Oru Kayak, Singularity University, and Teal Capital, among others. She is a leadership coach offering strength-based communication programs. She is founder and CEO of Elevate You, a boutique coach agency with a big mission to elevate well-being, positive change, and optimism, living into the best version of you and bringing out the best in others. Elle is associate professor in the MBA Design Strategy program at the California College of the Arts, teaching her original communication method. At Zoo Lab's Music Entrepreneurship Accelerator in Oakland, she coaches bands on interpersonal dynamics in business. This spring, Elle is launching The User's Guide to Me, a series of online programs, and first up in June is her masterclass on I Am Integrity, My Positive No. Enjoy my conversation with Elle. Just one, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I really look forward to the insight and wisdom that can come from our discussion.
I'm honored. I'm honored. I say thank you, and I also want to congratulate you, Kemi, because I've known you now for 10 years, and I've watched you go from graduate student, and then you were a participant in one of my coaching groups, and now you're hosting this podcast. And if I might just say a word about your strengths. One of your strengths is communication, a communicator, and you're really adept at making it. First of all, you're adept at moving ideas forward. This is for sure. That's your futuristic talent. But you're really adept at facilitating conversations where people have a sense of safety and freedom to speak what's on their mind. And you're gifted this. Watched you grow into it. So really congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elle.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to say at the top of the conversation, in these times, just to kind of acknowledge that we're a Black human being and a white human being having a conversation. Yeah.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to start off just by asking you how you're doing. How are you interpreting the time we're in right now? We're right now experiencing the second wave of the pandemic. We are in it. And how are you in it right now?
Thank you. First of all, I just appreciate, it's given me a really deep sense of appreciation about what it means to be human in terms of how people are responding and, this collective that we are. It's certainly an absolutely sobering time. And it's a time really where the opportunity, and it's happened, we're witnessing it as it's happening in a way that I don't think we ever have. The story, I'm going to frame this in terms of communication because that's my baby kind of, but it's the story beneath the story that is now surfacing. And we see this in the social justice movement, that conversations that needed to happen are happening finally. And however uncomfortable, it's a sign of health when we have when we engage at the level of the story beneath the given story. And I mean, that's in terms of certainly our public life, but also around the time of the start of the pandemic, I started with a new client, and she said to me, her question was, how do I learn to spend time by myself? And that's really, you know, each
Yeah.
of us, we've all been learning ourselves during this time. Yeah. So, especially when we navigate in accelerated, high demand worlds, I think that's a question that we recurrently have to bring along with us. You know, what is it that I'm learning about myself that I can contribute? And then the other thing I would say is, you know, I listened to Kamala Harris, her acceptance speech, and after toward the end of the speech, she spoke about how democracy has joy in it. Democracy has joy in it. And just in my own thinking, you know, during this time, it's so clear, well, way before COVID, starting around 4 years ago, it was very clear that democracy is an experiment that needs to be stewarded. It's something alive. And unless we participate, it's moribund. It can fall by the wayside. So I think it's given me a sense, and other people, just how precious democracy is. And yeah, stewardship, that's a good word for it. We have to take care of it.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you said about the client asking, how do I spend time with myself? That's pretty deep. And I remember feeling, this was years ago, feeling judgmental of people who had a hard time spending time alone because I'm such an introspective person. But in the last couple of years, I've I've been feeling a sense of restlessness alone, although I still do very much appreciate my time alone. A sense of restlessness, a sense of like just being a little more glued to my phone than normal, a little more like just not feeling settled and wanting to get on wanting to buy more things, which has been an issue, and then also just wanting to occupy my mind more.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on this word settled, that, you know, as we go through life, there are different levels of settling into yourself and abiding in, you know, this is an amazing phenomena that we've been given. And it's a practice. It's a practice. And very often, if I can cut to the chase a little bit, it's our routines. You know, I think when we're very young, we equate freedom with lack of routine. And in coaching people, I know that it's just not true. Yeah. And that it's the quality and the nature of the routines that really feed us and make it interesting and to spend time by ourselves. And if we're going to spend time by ourselves, then we have to become curious. I'm cutting to the chase again, about our fear, because fear is going to show up. And just to become like 5% more curious, oh, you know, about fear. What's that about? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
From a recent post you published on your website, you said, quote, "When my sister passed away too early, I saw in clear outline the difference between choosing to learn something and having learning thrust upon you. As time passed, I began to call this latter experience learning unasked." In that post, you talked about learning asked and learning unasked. Can you define those terms and talk a little bit more about how you specifically experience learning unasked?
Sure. So learning asked is learning how to bake a cake, learning, I'm going to take a course, I'm going to learn a new language, I'm going to learn French. That's learning that we consciously choose. But human beings always experience learning unasked. And it doesn't come to us initially as a situation of learning. We actually a challenge comes to us, and then we're at choice. And when my sister passed away, that was a moment of, she was my older sister, she was my bossy older sister, she was my, a guide in my life. And suddenly I was in free fall. And when you're in free fall, and everyone has experienced this, we all have stories around this, you know, how do we refine footing? And it seems to me that globally, we've been placed into this position of learning unasked, this COVID phenomena. We've never been here before. And people are, you know, we have some miracle workers, fortunately, but there's a sense of free fall. And how do we refine footing? And then, you know, it was such a learning for me. I learned so much about my sister after she passed. I so believe that when after we lose someone, a loved one, that the relationship continues. And it absolutely continued. And so the question for us in terms of COVID, in terms of anytime we experience a challenge is, first of all, are we going to place ourselves in the learning curve? Are we going to declare ourselves a learner? We don't have to. And that will produce a certain result. But if we choose to, that's a bona fide, that's going to build resilience and fierceness and commitment like nobody's business. Yeah, and I think we're at that, we've been at that crossroads for a while now, and it may continue. So it's a matter of re-choosing. Yeah.
Yeah, I really resonated with the term learning unasked. I think when I was much younger, I used to think about it as cursing unasked, because I thought everything that happened to me was like the story of my life, the curse upon me. I did something wrong. I was wrong. And it really took many years before I got to the point that, oh, this is actually here for me. This is a gift.
Brilliant, brilliant, because that's the name of the game, that we can't, you know, terrible things happen. And I don't want to gloss over that.
Right.
I mean, but if you have the wherewithal to position, I'm going to choose to learn from this friggin' episode, then you're on the path, I think. Yeah. That will make a difference in your life.
Yeah, it has in mine, certainly.
Yeah.
How did you go from painter to coach? Can you share your story a little bit?
Sure. So maybe I should go back even further, which is when I was a kid, and I grew up in Brooklyn, and the adults used to call me an instigator because I was always inventing games for my friends to play, and I knew they'd have a great time playing, and we did. And but I was also kind of characterized as the dreamy one, the creative one. So I'm a painter. I became a painter, and I've spent thousands of hours alone in the studio, which I think is a beautiful preparation for teaching communication. And it goes back to this question again of spending time alone and what's possible, you know. A friend of mine who's an artist says if you stay in the studio long enough, everything under the sun will occur to you. So fast forward, I went from being a painter to teaching MFA students, Master of Fine Art graduate students, painters, video artists, textiles, photographers. And that exchange, Kemi, a variation of what you're doing here, just having conversations with people about how to progress their work was completely informative to my own learning. And then I shifted from teaching MFA students to teaching MBA students, Master of Business, right? And that's where I met you.
Yes.
Bless the day. And my own way of thinking, but those two worlds, the world of creativity and the world of business, overlap. That people who are engaged in business have absolute creative drive. It just doesn't show up in terms of painting or video or that sort of thing. And I think we do ourselves an injustice if we circumscribe who we are and say, you know, creativity is something distant from me. anyway, it was kind of my ethos. And then along the way, I became an entrepreneur, and I have a coaching company. But so in a very organic way, and actually well before I ever thought about design thinking or design strategy, the world of the quantitative and the qualitative was something that I lived in. Yeah. And I feel blessed, and I've developed a methodology around integrating those two moments, because we can't deny them. We can't deny them if we're going to step fully into leadership. Yeah. Or even just creating our own life. It's both of those aspects. The strategy, but the caring, the empathy, both of those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I think of painter and coach, the word that comes out for me for both of those is vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. If we're going to speak authentic voice, if we're going to practice authentic choice, that isn't a practice in being vulnerable. And it seems to me that the world, is hungry for examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
We are, I've coached enough people to know we're all works in progress, no matter where we are. Mm-hmm. We're all works in progress, and vulnerability. Say more.
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly with being, I think we're both for sure, but when I think about like with a coach, because I think maybe some people might have a hard time making the two relative to each other. And but I do think that obviously there's vulnerability on the person being coached, right? That has to happen in order for you to coach, for them to be coachable. But then I think, I saw your thoughtful face, the tilt.
Yes. Should I respond here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I coach achievers. I coach people with a lot of friggin' drive. I coach people who would not characterize themselves in the least as vulnerable.
But I wonder if in that process of coaching them, do you get to a point where they have to make a decision to be vulnerable, right?
But it's not that I love what you're saying, and it's not an unhappy game. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, sure.
That it's absolutely that it's a matter of using that word you used earlier, settling in. The more you settle into yourself, the more you ground in yourself. And in my case, specifically, I coach people on their strengths. The more you ground in your strengths, vulnerability is this beautiful byproduct that you can handle. Mm. It's a delicious thing, being vulnerable.
Yes, for sure.
When you're not at the effect of it. If you're at the effect of being vulnerable, it's not fun. Mm-hmm. And that's a distinction in my work that I coach people on. And I wouldn't ask people to take certain actions when they're feeling vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And other actions, I would say, even though you feel vulnerable, do the thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I also think as the person practicing the coaching, there is a level of vulnerability that you have to show up with in order to like receive people and their experiences.
Again, saying you have to show up with vulnerability, to me, I'm not sure I would want to go into a situation where I have to show up with vulnerability. Mm-hmm. You do have to show up as a listener.
Yeah.
You do have to show up. One of the things I prize more is willingness. Mm-hmm. Willingness to learn new ways of being in the world. Mm-hmm. And the reason I want to emphasize this thing, I know vulnerability is a very popular word now, but I don't want to misuse it. I really want to respect it.
Yeah.
To me, it's sort of like, peeling layers, and it's one of the, it's critical. To me, it goes to presence, simply being present. Mm-hmm. We're vulnerable. Well, we're vulnerable in so many ways. I guess what I just want to, I want to make a case for not forcing vulnerability. Yeah.
I totally receive that. Yeah. I think I'm in the space of working on being more vulnerable for myself, and then for others that I feel safe with. that, you know, I'm seeing it now as like, okay, this is something I'm actively in and something that I have to do and be as a leader, you know, in the work that I do, as well as, you know, who I am as a person, as a human being.
Well, you've just described that's an optimal place to be.
Mm-hmm.
When you are consciously saying, okay, I'm testing myself now. I'm going to be vulnerable here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful place to be. That's to know that, to be alive and know you're alive. That's, you just sort of described it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And do you think the same, because I see the same applying to visual, to being a painter and being vulnerable to your internal feelings and expressing that on canvas or paper?
Well, you know, I teach communication, and in communication, it's said that the number one human fear is public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a Japanese philosopher, Hayakawa, who said, self-image preservation is our number one fear.
Yeah,
You know, we
that's
so
big.
we so want to look cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this piece around vulnerability just, you know, melts that away. We're friendly enough with ourselves, we're confident enough in ourselves that we're willing to be vulnerable. That makes sense?
That makes total sense. Thank
Okay.
you. Learning moment. How would you describe the work that you do?
You know, the name of your very brilliant podcast is Who Are You? And I was thinking about how would I describe the work that I do? And it's a related question, which is, who are you becoming? Who are you becoming? And helping people, guiding people to advance professionally, have better relationships, professionally and personally, by in an ongoing way becoming the best version of yourself. It's not static, in other words. One of the questions I like to ask is, who do you need to become to live into the promise that you are?
I love that.
Yeah, and my by inclination and temperament, I am always hungry to look at what's the possibility within any set of constraints. And in coaching someone, you know, they have constraints, and internal and external. And in light of that, what's possible here? What's possible here? Who can you become? And specifically in my own case, I coach people on their strengths, And just a little background: in 2009, I wanted a narrative assessment, something that lended itself to interpretation, because it was all the rage. Coaches were giving assessment tests, and I began giving strength finders to my clients. And I've written my own interpretation of all the 34 strengths. And it's not enough simply to identify your strengths, in this case, the 5 core strengths. You have to know how to activate and manage and use them in real life. It's in the realization, it's in the testing, it's in the willing to be vulnerable around your strengths that you really get to hone them and be great at them. And parenthetically, if I could say here, you know, everybody wants to have more confidence. And what I like to say to people, you know, and confidence, when you have it, fantastic. But for a very long while, there are people with a lot of drive, achievers, who don't have confidence. Mm-hmm. And yet we proceed, yet we accomplish great things. Yes, confidence is overrated. And I like that because it peels away the layer of, there are so many people, and I work with them, who are so talented and so ambitious and have a vision, but hold themselves back because they think they don't have confidence. Forget it. Forget it. Do what you need to do, and the confidence will come. It's not a requirement. It's not a requirement. And I mean, I could go on and on around confidence, but
I really love that. I don't think I've ever heard confidence spoken to in that way before. That's very interesting. And that's actually, because at first, like, my gut was like, but then as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, that's liberating, to be able to be afraid, to to
Not just afraid,
out.
not just to be afraid. You're going to be afraid. If
Yeah,
you're about to enact, take a vision
yeah,
from incubation to reality, fear will show up. That's why I said earlier, become curious, about your fear, even if it's 5%. The next time fear comes up, I'm giving everyone a homework. Um, be 5% friendlier to your own fear, and just see what happens. Just see what happens. So at any rate, I I coach people on their core strengths, because first of all, you identify a strength, not enough. You have to practice it. But the other piece is that to have a strength, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in your favor.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are walking around getting in their own way, not aligning with their strengths. So if you ask what I do in my work, I I've written this compendium of ways to align with your strengths, so that you're more streamlined toward where you're headed.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about what you're working on right now. And I did see on your site that you talk about a user's guide to me, which I really, really love. So if you could tell us what you're working on, and unpack for us what a user's guide to me is.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Again, a story. My mother was a very plain-spoken woman, very direct, but plain-spoken. She didn't give me a lot of verbal advice. She more modeled how to have integrity in the world. But one of the things that she did say to me when I was little was, she would say to me, be yourself. And as a preteen, as a teen, I had no clue what that meant. What? But fast forward, in many ways, this work that I've developed is about being yourself. It's based on her advice. Um, and when we come into the world, we don't have a guide. We don't have a guide. And let me get back to that by saying, for 10 years, I've coached in-person groups, small groups, in this method. And I've loved doing that. Next, I'm going to be doing coaching groups online. And the umbrella term is the user's guide to me.
I see.
So I have, I write curriculum, and I design this methodology that's very good at getting people to look here, not here, so that they don't spin their wheels or waste their time, or get out of revolving doors of passé ways of thinking. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be offering some courses online.
Yeah, I really love that concept of user's guide to me. It reminds me of the concept of human design, or the term human design. Yeah. It's so funny, because I think for me personally, life was just happening to me, and to have this concept of, no, wait, I can stop, I can pause, reflect, and work out who I am, and what do I do next, or how do I respond to what happens next. Yeah, it's just I love that.
That's the great honor of being human, is that we can author our story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Name of the game, Kemi. Yeah. Well said.
So you've written, quote, in a time when consolidation/control are key colorants, and where life is increasingly codified, how do we conserve the improvisational moment at the heart of creativity?
Yeah, this is a big question for us. We live at a moment where technology has really changed what it means to be human. At the same time, we needed technology. It needed to be invented for us to take care of what we're up to as human beings. So I want to be very clear, I'm not dissing technology. However, there is a certain, and again, you're speaking to someone who's cued toward communication. There's a certain flattening of discourse where we live in a time where we're more or less obliged to replicate stereotypical discourse.
Mm-hmm.
That's a quote from Derrida, and I hear it because, clients come to me because they want to articulate their personal brand story. And we're at a moment now where we need to educate ourselves about how to tell richer, more nuanced, more subtle stories. Mm-hmm. And certainly stories of difference. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that. But I think it's a good caution for my way of thinking. And Kemi, I want to thank you here at the close of this conversation, because it's a simple conversation between two people. You can never predict what's going to happen in the conversation. And that is a miracle of human speech. That is a miracle of human speech and human relationship and invention. Yeah. So keep the podcast going.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, and that used to scare me, even though I am an improvisational person, but I think going into a professional world of feeling like I have to be planned and rehearsed, it made me nervous.
Well, that's exactly it, is that increasingly professional landscapes are circumscribed in terms of what's permissible, what's not. And that's why it's critical what you're doing here, and to model for other people, and all of us, just to engage in conversations that ask the question, what's missing here? What needs to be invented? What are we not talking about that we should be talking about? That's improvisation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What does your work say about you?
I couldn't answer that. You'd have to ask people who have worked with me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Elle.
Thank you.
Learn more about Elle at elevateyou.com. That's ELLEVATEYOU.com. Watch episodes of this podcast on YouTube. There is always a link in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification button. You can also listen to episodes wherever you get your podcasts. To get more content not shared anywhere else, subscribe to the email list at waypodcast.com. That's WAYPODCAST.com. Until our next conversation, I am your host, Kemi Amin.